Welcome to the next, this seminar of the external seminar series of the department. I'm going to present, our presenter today is Santiago Budria. He's professor of economics at Nebrija University. We know one to each other from many years ago. And his research interest, among other many things, he's particularly interested in inequality and energy poverty. So this is the paper he's going to present today. So, Santi, whenever you want.
Thank you very much. I feel honored by being here. Luis is right. We have been knowing each other for a while, and this is the first time he invites me for a seminar after 20 years or something. I have invited you more times.
The relationship was not so mature, so I need to make sure that.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to present my work. Well, this is a joint work with two co-authors from Universidad Pontificia de Comillas. You know Alejandro also. And basically this paper gravitates around a question, which is how important is the language you speak in order to get integrated in the country that receives you? How important is being proficient in the host language in order to get integrated in the labor market and in the society? This is not a novel question. It has been extensively examined in the literature. And the literature corroborates that being proficient in the host language, if you're an immigrant, helps you to get a better integration in the host country. So fluency in the host country's dominant language has been a prominent theme in the literature. There is extensive evidence that showing that being proficient helps you to get higher earnings, better employment opportunities, to be more integrated in the society. Why? Well, there are theoretical underpinnings. There are intuitions behind that. If you are proficient in the host language, you can develop communication networks. You can express better your qualifications, your skills, your abilities to potential employers. You can establish bridging connections with natives. You can get a better knowledge of the natives. You can establish relationships with them, so you can have access to improved networks of social support. There are also other channels. If you are proficient in the host language, you have insider information. You have the opportunity to have better access to public social assistance programs, and you have better tools to deal with the administration. So this is corroborated by a myriad of papers showing that, well, if you are proficient, if you are an immigrant and you dominate the host language, you are expected to receive higher earnings, have more employment opportunities. I quote here Di Paolo's and Mayen's work because it's about Catalan. How important is Catalan in order to have better jobs and better paid jobs? It's also related with educational achievement, social integration, even health outcomes. Okay, so this is on the one hand. This is one strand of the literature. There is a second strand of the literature, which is energy poverty. Energy poverty is a hot topic right now. It has been studied as a standalone subject for years. And over the last 3-4 years, it has become more important, basically due to rising energy prices. The Ukrainian war has also triggered concerns about the evolution of energy prices, fuel, electricity, gas. So what we observe over the last 3-4 years is that the share of household income that goes to electricity and gas bills has increased in most developed economies. So decreasing the share of energy-deprived households has become a priority for government agencies and institutions, trying to lower the prevalence of energy poverty among the population. So these are the two pillars that we're going to take into account in order to develop our work. On the one hand, we have host language proficiency and its impact on specific economic outcomes for immigrants, and on the other hand, the issue of energy poverty. Energy poverty is relevant because it is related to a number of economic outcomes. Energy poverty is negatively related with self-perceived social status. Energy poverty is negatively related with productivity, how productive you are in your job. It's negatively related with well-being, health outcomes, and even mortality. So there is extensive research showing causal impact of energy poverty upon these dependent variables. There is recent literature on this, many papers. These are perhaps the most up-to-date papers showing this causal relation between energy poverty and some economic outcome. Please.
Sorry, when you say energy poverty, you mean?
No sé si estaban, pero...
No, just a question. When you say energy poverty, you mean that they have no access, or that it's too expensive, or what do you mean exactly?
There are different ways to measure energy poverty. Basically, we are trying to capture difficulties in accessing energy services or affording energy services. I will present a battery of measures that are typically used in the literature, but basically what we are willing to capture is people's difficulty in having access or paying those electricity or gas services. Basically, that's the idea. I said energy poverty has been studied as a standalone subject. And here there is a typical bias or a typical misunderstanding. Most people believe that energy poverty is very, very closely related with income. I mean, if you are energy poor because you are income poor. Well, yes and no. That's partially true. Energy poverty is correlated with income, but the correlation is not that high. So there is a fraction of the population who is located in the upper segments of the income distribution who report struggling with electricity and gas bills. There is a proportion of the income distribution of people located in the middle and upper the sides of the distribution who report having problems to heat their homes during winter time because of the cost of energy. Okay, so there's a correlation, but the correlation is not that high.
They have different expenditures, I guess. In a poor household, they need. They have maybe different preferences. A poor household will use energy to heat the house, and a rich household, maybe they have a pool, a swimming pool, they have animals, whatever.
Yeah, well, there is an issue here is your preferences and your priorities. Because perhaps for you having a warm house is very relevant, is more important than going twice a week to McDonald's, for example. So you prefer to spend more money in having a warm house, while other people may give priorities to other stuff and give away energy services. This is something we cannot observe. But because of this concern, what we're going to do is we're going to use different measures of energy poverty. So I will present them in 2 minutes. Let me show you a graph which illustrates the prevalence of energy poverty depending on the side of the income distribution you occupy. These are different energy poverty measures. I will present them in a while. Okay. But well, of course, there is a correlation between the prevalence of energy poverty and income. But there are some variables typically used as a measure of energy poverty or to capture people struggling with energy issues, which is quite evenly distributed over the income distribution. This is, for example, the amount of people, the proportion of people who report having arrears. You are not paying on time electricity and gas bills. Okay, so of course the proportion is a little bit higher in the first deciles of the distribution, but still we observe that a non-negligible amount of people have arrears, even people in the upper segments of the distribution. Also here you have the heat variable, which is, are you facing problems? Are you facing difficulties in keeping your house warm in winter time due to financial issues? And again, the proportion is higher in the lower segments of the distribution, but still we observe that some people in the upper segments of the income distribution report having problems in that dimension. Okay, so the incidence of energy poverty is dependent upon the specific item we use. It's more concentrated in the lower segments of the income distribution, yes, but in some cases we observe a relatively high prevalence rate in the upper income deciles. Please.
No, just this is for which country?
Sorry, what?
This data is for which country?
For Australia. I forgot to say I'm going to talk about Australia because we have a nice data set about Australia. We have the same graph for Germany because we have also a nice data set for Germany, and it's the prevalence of energy poverty is very much concentrated in the lower segments of the income distribution. So it seems that in Australia it's more evenly spread over the different deciles. This is a clear different pattern if you compare Germany and Australia. I will present those items in a while. Okay, so what are we doing in this paper? First, we're going to estimate the impact of host language proficiency on energy poverty. That's our goal, to measure by how much being proficient in the host language helps you to reduce the likelihood of being energy poor. We're going to use data for Australia. This is a panel data set. We can follow people over time. We have more than 20 years. We didn't use all the waves, but still there are many observations already in that subsample. Australia is an interesting case because 30% of its population is born overseas, and it ranks 9th in global terms in terms of total immigration, total population born abroad. 30% of the population is immigrant in Australia. And moreover, in Australia, we have detected a rise in the household budget devoted to pay energy expenditures. So there's a prevalence of problems related to energy access and affordability as measured and stated by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. It makes an interesting case. What are the results of the paper? Basically what we do is we show that being English proficient decreases the probability of being energy poor by almost 19%, 19 percentage points. Okay. That's the main result. Of course, the result depends on the energy poverty indicator. It depends on the model specification, but the result is quite robust, I would say. And we test for potential transmission mechanisms. Why people who are proficient in English are less likely to be energy poor? Is that because they are richer? Is that because they have a job? Is that because they have better social networks? Is it the case that they have more financial support by the state, by friends? We will test some explanations, some potential explanations that may account for this fact. Let me add that after adjusting for a battery of factors, still 40% of the effect remains. I mean, this 18% is not due to differences in labor market outcomes. It is not due to differences in individual or household income. It is not due to differences in access to social capital. And it is not due to differences in having access to public programs, public subsidies. social assistance programs. So after controlling for all these factors, a significant part of the effect remains. We will provide some candidate explanations at the end of the paper. So if you are thinking that, well, this is because they are poorer, because they have part of it, part of the explanation is that, but there is another independent effect, okay, which is about 40% of this 18% differential. Well, these are the results. You may say, well, and where is the paper? I don't see a formula, I don't see the econometric approach. I'm done with the presentation. Well, these are the results. Let's go to the details. Well, expected contributions. You know, you target for many issues when you start a paper. At the end, only you partially cover these objectives. So what is the model and the estimation strategy we are going to follow? We are going to use to stage these squares. We are going to use instrumental variables. Basically, this strategy tackles three main problems in this kind of analysis. The first problem is endogeneity. People who are English proficient, they are not a random sample. They may have and observe skills and abilities that make them more likely to be proficient in English, and at the same time, those abilities and skills may help them to have better jobs or better access to information, so they end up being less likely to be energy poor. So English proficiency probably is endogenous, okay, and dependent upon variables that we cannot observe. This is why we need instrumental variables. A second concern is reverse causality issues. If you are English proficient, you may be less likely to be energy poor, but it may happen also that if you are more likely to be energy poor because, for example, you are living in a quarter, in a neighborhood with lower quality houses, with a lower quality insulation, you are more energy poor or more likely to be energy poor. And at the same time, if you are surrounded by people who are not natives and you cannot learn English as fast as people living in better quality neighborhoods, probably we observe some reverse causality. Energy poverty, location, geographical location, urban location, affecting the chances of being English proficient. And the last concern is measurement error. We suspect that our measure of English proficiency is subject to measurement error, especially because we use subjective information. The data set asks people how proficient you are in English. And here there is a lot of bias. People who believe that, well, they speak English very well, perhaps they don't speak English that well. Okay, so in order to reduce or restrict the potential effects of these concerns, we're going to use two-stage these squares. But of course, in order to do that, we need an instrument. Okay, so we're going to define the second stage. We are gonna define the second stage regression. This is EP is energy poverty. It's modeled as a function of explanatory variables. Here we have a wide set of socioeconomic factors: age, gender, education, many factors. And here we have English proficiency. How proficient you are, or whether or not you are proficient, is expected to affect the likelihood of being energy poor. That's the second stage regression. And this is going to be our first stage regression. We need to explain why a person is proficient in English. We're going to use, again, a battery of socioeconomic indicators. And here we have the instrument. The instrument has to satisfy some conditions. The most important one is the instrument should be relevant to explain English proficiency. And very important, in order to be valid, the instrument has to affect energy poverty only through language proficiency. If you include here a variable that affects at the same time English proficiency and energy poverty, that's an invalid instrument. So you're going to get biased results. Okay, so we need to struggle a little bit to find an instrument that affects energy poverty only through the language channel. Okay, I will try to convince you that our instrument is good. I will try. Probably I will fail, but I will try. So what we are going to estimate, what we are going to estimate is this theta is the cruise of our analysis. This is the central part of our analysis. We are going to estimate the effect of language proficiency on energy poverty, and this is the late or latte or whatever estimate. There's the local average treatment effect in the language of econometricians. This is a local average treatment effect. So, measures of energy poverty, we are going to use two categories of measures. The first part is the so-called expenditure-based. And the second category is self-assessed measures of energy poverty. In the first category, these expenditure-based measures, it's very simple. It basically captures whether or not you are above a specific threshold in terms of how much money you spend in electricity, gas, in gas bills. Depending on whether or not you are above the threshold, you are considered to be energy poor in that dimension. What are the thresholds? What thresholds are those? Well, in the literature, you can find typically 3-4 thresholds. The most popular ones, which are the ones we use, are those thresholds. For example, the 2M indicators, you are considered to be energy poor in this particular dimension if the share of income spent on energy is greater than twice the national median. I know all these items can be criticized. A person may be severely energy poor without being above these thresholds. I agree. This is the reason why we use different variables at the same time. The TPR threshold, this captures whether the share of income, household income, spent on energy exceeds 10%. So you are considered to be energy poor if your electricity and gas bills, this accounts for more than 10% of your household income, according to this indicator. And this is a more subtle indicator, the leak indicator. You have to satisfy two conditions here. If your actual energy expenditures are above the national median, condition number one, and at the same time, your income, net of energy costs, is below the official national income poverty line, then you are considered to be energy poor in that dimension. And these are the objective indicators of energy poverty. One may say, well, okay, you mentioned that before. Ceteris paribus, take two families with similar income levels, with similar socioeconomic profiles. You may observe that one of the families exceeds those thresholds because they give priority to energy poverty, to energy access, to energy affordability. While other families may give away heating services, for example, in order to go more frequently to McDonald's. Okay, in order to tackle that problem,
this is before taxation or after taxation?
This is in net terms, after taxation.
After taxation.
After taxation. We use net income.
Taxation can affect the results if you compare different countries with different taxation.
With different countries, absolutely. I would say, yeah. The prevalence, if you use the net variable, the prevalence is going to depend on the fiscal system. Absolutely. We didn't do that, but I think in the literature there are some papers showing to what extent the prevalence changes if you use gross or net terms. The prevalence changes, but the effects you estimate afterwards do not change by much. Yeah. The effects upon the variable of interest for the pay. So, in order to tackle this problem, we also rely on subjective assessment. How do you feel in terms of what are the questions included in this data set? We have two. Do you have difficulties, yes or no, in paying to heat your home because of a shortage of money? Yes or no? That's heat, another variable, another item you're going to use. And we have another one, which is, do you have difficulties in keeping up with the electricity and gas bills? If you have arrears, then here you have a dummy variable capturing that you are struggling with keeping up with electricity and gas bills. Okay, so we are going to combine these two different sources of information, objective measures plus subjective measures. Since we have objective measures and subjective measures, and it's a mess to report regressions for every single factor, what we're going to do is we define an aggregate measure of poverty, which we call multidimensional poverty. And so, basically, this is a weighted average that takes into account in how many dimensions, in how many of those previous items you are deprived. Okay, so this index basically ranges from 0 to 100%. If you are poor in every single dimension, this poverty index is going to take 100. You are poor in all dimensions. If you are poor in 0 dimensions, this is going to be 0. Okay, so this is the weight you give to every dimension. In this paper, the weight is equal across dimensions, which is basically a counting approach, how many dimensions you are poor. Okay? So we could use this as a continuous measure, the score, the energy poverty score, or you can set an arbitrary threshold to say, well, I'm going to consider that a family or an individual is multidimensionally poor if this family is above a specific threshold. So in this paper, what we did is, if you are above a specific threshold, and this threshold is the 90th percentile of the energy poverty score distribution, then you are considered to be multidimensionally poor. In order to be multidimensionally poor, you have to be poor in a number of dimensions. That's like severe poverty. You are poverty according to the TPR indicator, to the 2M indicator, to the heat indicator, so you need a number of poverty dimensions to be activated if you are multidimensionally poor. Okay, so we are going to focus our analysis on this variable, even though I will also report results for the other indicators. Yes? So we're going to have 6 indicators open. Okay? Of course, the different indicators, they capture different realities. This is a table showing the extent of overlap between indicators. For example, if you are poor according to the 2M indicator, then the percentage of people who are poor in the 2M indicator and also poor in the leak indicator is only 30%. So if you are poor in this dimension, people who are poor in this dimension, only 30% of them are also poor in the leak dimension. And 53% of people who are poor in this dimension are multidimensionally poor. Okay? If you are poor according to the leak indicator, certainly you are also poor according to the 2M indicator. Only 9% of the people who are leak poor, who are poor according to this indicator, only 9% are poor according to the heat indicator. So the correlation between objective measures and subjective measures is not that high. Basically, they are capturing different realities. We can also look at the arrears indicator. If you are not keeping up with electricity and gas bills, there is a low chance that you are also poor according to this indicator, only 3%. And there is not a high chance that you are multidimensionally poor. Only 30% of the people who are not keeping up with the bills are multidimensionally poor. Okay, so there is overlap, but the extent of overlap is not that high. So they are capturing different realities. Which one is right, which one is wrong? We don't know. Typically in the literature, you use as many sources of information as you can. And again, remember that the prevalence of energy poverty depends on the energy poverty indicator. Now, it's important to pay attention to the multidimensional energy poverty indicator. It peaks here in the second and the third side of the distribution, and then it goes down, but a certain proportion, between 5 and 10% of the population in the upper segments of income distribution are multidimensionally poor. So they are poor in different dimensions, not just in one dimension. Okay, relevant variables, language proficiency. What is the language proficiency information we have? Would you say you speak English now from 1 to 4? We are going to consider that a person is proficient if the person reports, I speak English very well. Okay? I agree, this may be severely biased. We all know that. If you run an experiment among your students, asking them, do you think that you did well in your exam? Do you think that you are above the average? Like 70% of the students, they report that they are above the average, 70%. Probably the same happens here. What we get is that 70% of the immigrants in the sample report being proficient in English. Ideally, we would like to have objective measures of language proficiency. There are papers based on objective measures. I mean, they do an exam. But that's very hard to find in large-scale surveys. Our survey has thousands of observations, and it is very costly to run an objective test of English proficiency. So you have to rely on subjective measures. And most papers in the field are based on subjective measures. But of course, an interesting question is, what would happen if we knew with more accuracy what is the level of English proficiency among immigrants? We cannot answer that question in this paper. So, what is the instrument? That's the core part of the paper. What is the instrument we are going to use? We need a variable that relates with proficiency and not with energy poverty. That's complicated, but we have an empirical regularity here. This is an interesting graph. It shows you how proficient you are in English depending on the age at arrival in Australia. At which age you arrived to Australia. So look at this blue line. This is telling me that for some immigrants, arriving at the age of 1, arriving at the age of 10, or arriving at the age of 20 doesn't matter. They are proficient no matter what. Well, those guys, these are coming from countries where the official language is English. Okay, this is people from Scotland, the UK, Jamaica, going to Australia. They are proficient in English already. So it doesn't matter if they arrive very early or very late in their lives. The interesting group is the other one. This is people who come from countries where the official language is not English. And an interesting pattern emerges. If you come to Australia very early, before the age of 9 or 8, you're gonna end up being proficient because you learn the language very fast. But if you come to Australia after those ages, it's very hard to be English proficient. Okay, if you start speaking English at the age of 18, like my case, you speak English like I'm speaking English, not a native certainly. But if you come to Australia early, you're going to end up speaking English very well. So that's going to be our instrument. But attention, the instrument cannot be age at arrival, because age at arrival is also related with energy poverty and labor market outcomes. If you come early to Australia, you have more time to adjust. You have more time to be assimilated. So you have a lower chance of being unemployed, having low earnings, and a lower chance of being energy poor. So age at arrival itself cannot be an instrument. And also, coming from a country with an English-speaking background, or coming from a country without an English-speaking background, this cannot be an instrument either. Because there might be differences in terms of energy poverty depending on whether you are coming from rich countries, English-speaking countries, or poor countries, non-English-speaking countries. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna use the interaction between age at arrival after the age of 9 and whether or not you are an immigrant coming from a non-English speaking background country. This instrument is not was not made up by us. It's based on a paper by Blakely and Chin, 2004, 2010. This instrument has been used by other papers, and it's regarded as one of the most credible instruments for English proficiency, or for any other proficiency. You may also use language distance. We also report results for language distance. Another potential factor explaining how proficient you are is how far away is your native tongue relative to English. Right? So that level of proximity can be used also to account for the probability of being English proficient. We also use language distance in the paper. But this is the central issue. Of course, this instrument is wrong. It's invalid if age of arrival after the age of 9 helps in different ways the two categories of immigrants. If immigrants from English-speaking backgrounds get more benefits from every year in Australia than immigrants without an English-speaking background, then this instrument is invalid. Okay, so we have to make sure, and this is why we run many sensitivity checks, that the instrument is not correlated with unobservables. Okay, these are the naive results. These are OLS results, very small effects. We find that no matter what the energy poverty measure is, the effect of language proficiency is practically around 1%, 2%. This is, for example, telling me that if you are English if you are English proficient, the likelihood of being energy poor is 1.5% lower, according to this OLS estimator. Not a very relevant effect, I would say. Before going to the central part of the paper, well, energy poverty depends on gender and negatively on schooling and marital status. Depending on your marital status, you are more or less likely to be energy poor. The more educated you are, the lower the chances of being energy poor. This is only part of the results. We include many other controls depending on in which part of Australia you live. We include age at arrival dummies, country of birth, fixed effects. You may say, well, how likely you are to be energy poor depends also on your country of origin. So we include a battery of country of birth fixed effects. We include Australian regions fixed effects, and we include time fixed effects. Many controls in the regression. And the energy price
why you didn't try to control for individual effects, just to make a try? Because I think that many of the problems with unobservables will disappear with this. And you don't need regions effects, and unless they change the region, why not using this approach? Because at the end, my guess is that when you estimate your IB model, you will still use a linear probability model, right?
Yeah.
So why not doing it with individual fixed effects?
That's a very good question. Basically, the explanation is that in order to estimate a fixed effect estimator, you need variation over time of the variable of interest. So the within estimator basically depends on having people changing their proficiency level. And what we have in the data is like, I don't remember the figures, but I think that every year, only 4.8% of the immigrants report a change in their language proficiency level. 2/3 of the immigrants report always being proficient over the entire panel. One all the time. While the other third of the immigrants report being non-proficient. So you have very small variation in the variable of interest to estimate a fixed effect model. Your beta is going to be determined basically by those 4% of the individuals who change their proficiency level. But of course, I agree. I mean, if we are concerned with unobservables, the best way would be to control for fixed effects and do panel estimation. The problem is that language proficiency is a variable that changes not much. I mean, you find variations in income, employment status, marital status, but language proficiency is something that changes only once if it changes. And moreover, once it goes to 1, you are proficient, it never goes back. Suddenly you become non-proficient. So basically that's why we didn't estimate fixed effects. Okay, and these are the two-stage least square results. Once we take into account measurement error bias, the endogeneity of language skills, we get that, well, depending on the indicator, the chances of being energy poor decrease dramatically if you are English proficient. If we look at the multidimensional energy poverty index, we find that if you are language proficient, the chances of being poor in that dimension go down by 90 percentage points, which is a high effect because, for example, a 10-year increase in schooling is associated with minus 10 percentage points, minus 10% percentage points variation in the probability of being energy poor. So these are seizable effects. Please.
Yeah, yes. Just can you go back to the previous slide with the naive estimation? Yes. Okay, because this is something usual in naive estimators. But for instance, you increase the point estimate of the parameter. But for instance, take first the last one, the ND. The standard deviation of the coefficient is 0.007. And then if you go to the next slide, is 0.06 is like multiplied almost by 10. So, I mean, you get bigger parameters, so they are significant, but they are not really precise, I would say. I mean, I would like to see some kind of confidence interval for the parameters, just to make sure that, I mean, the parameter...
For those parameters?
Yeah, doesn't go from 0.001 to 0.35 or 38. Just because it's something that with IB estimators it has to do, I mean, always IB estimator will have higher variance. This is a mechanical thing, but it's important to make sure that the variance does not increase because it means that, okay, I have a bigger coefficient, but the estimation is not very precise. So it's something that I think is...
But in all those cases, the 0 stays out of the confidence interval.
No, otherwise it would be not significant. But still, I think it's 0, but it moves, for instance, from 0.05 to 0.43.
So there is a lot of variance,
yeah,
in the range of potential true values.
Exactly.
Yeah. What we do in the paper, not reported here, is we provide those confidence intervals, and also I'm not gonna present that, but we also provide estimations if there are local violations of the exclusion restriction. So the instrument violates the assumption by how much the width of the confidence interval changes. We have those results in the paper. But certainly I get the point. So the question is, if there are so many potential true values, this is just an average. This is just an average. Yeah, certainly. But still, it's significant.
Well, we look for always the 3 stars.
Yeah. Okay, so now the instrument may be not a valid instrument. Certainly, there are many issues in this kind of estimation. So, what we do in the paper, we provide results for a large battery of sensitivity checks. Each sensitivity check is associated with a candidate explanation or a potential concern. For example, the first one here, sample restricted to immigrants that took all years of education before arrival in Australia. Why we do that? If you took your education in Australia, I mean, if you are educated within the Australian education system, there's a high chance that you are English proficient. Otherwise, how you are going to end up having an Australian education? If having Australian education affects the chances of being proficient, certainly it affects, then it may be the case that the effects estimated in the paper are not a reward to English proficiency, but a reward to domestic education, a reward to Australian education. This is something that may happen. So what we did here is we took out of the sample people who studied in Australia. So here, for this exercise, we keep in sample only individuals who took all their education outside Australia. In that case, this effect cannot be a reward to domestic education. It should be a reward to English language proficiency. And what we observe is a decrease in the coefficient. A relatively large decrease in the coefficient, but still it is significant. So perhaps there are some ongoing effects in that dimension. Some part of the English proficiency reward is due to domestic education. But another part remains, and certainly it remains for the other indicators. Another potential concern is that, okay, your identification strategy relies a lot on depending on whether the immigrant comes from a country with English-speaking background or a country without an English-speaking background. Say Mexicans and people from Scotland, let's say. You may say, well, perhaps in that case, this is a reward to better educational systems. If people coming from countries with an English-speaking background have had access to better education systems, and this education gives them a reward in the society that receives them, in the labor market and in the society, perhaps this effect may capture not a reward to English proficiency, but a reward to having better educational credentials or better education quality. So what we did in another sensitivity check is we controlled for PISA results.
So these PISA results are individual, for each individual?
No, at the country level. So we merged.
Because I was a bit amazed that was individual.
No, I mean, this is the average PISA score for your country. If you come from Mexico, this is your country level PISA score, which is intended to capture the educational quality of the education system in your country. Okay, so it's at the aggregate level, it's at the country level. And this is interesting. If you observe this interaction, this means that people coming from countries with a superior educational level catch up faster or are less likely to be energy poor for every additional year of being in Australia. So you converge more rapidly in terms of energy poverty if you come from a country with superior educational standards. So this matches a priori expectations, but still the coefficient on energy poverty remains significant. So potential educational differences in terms of quality do not explain why we get a positive coefficient here. Okay. Another sensitivity check, you may say, one may say, I wrote something here. Yeah, you may say, if you come from a richer country, perhaps you have social norms, or you share social norms that are more related with Australian social norms. People coming from richer countries have similar cultural backgrounds or share social norms with people living in Australia. Perhaps you adapt more rapidly. In that case, the English proficiency coefficient would reflect not the price on language, but the price of coming from a country that is more related with Australia. So what we did is we controlled for country of origin's GDP in order to make sure that we are not including through the backdoor differences in terms of country background or family background. Probably people coming from richer countries have also stronger family backgrounds. They come ceteris paribus from richer families. And again, the coefficient turns out to be clearly significant. Another potential concern is, well, what if immigrants coming from countries with an English-speaking background are better off in terms of family wealth, family income? What if their parents are better off economically? In that case, they are less likely to be energy poor because their family background is strong. So what we did is we went to the HITA data set, we have that information, we have a variable that measures the father's occupational status. So we also control for the father's occupational status in order to get rid of this potential concern. And again, what we get is a very similar coefficient, around 19%. So we try to control for non-observed differences in terms of educational quality, individual background, parental socioeconomic status, household financial stress between immigrants. Here another battery. Here we have another battery of sensitivity checks. How much time we have, more or less?
5 more minutes.
5 more minutes. So we restrict the sample to household heads. We also drop individuals married to a native. This is a comment by one of the reviewers. One of the reviewers said, what if having English skills allows you to marry richer partners, natives? Okay, so we got rid of people who married Australian people. And in that case, the effect also persists. We also included control for housing financial stress, how much of your income goes to pay the rent or the mortgage. And we also included household level explanatory variables. Okay, so the effects are quite robust to all these additional sensitivity checks. We also introduced other sensitivity checks. For example, rather than using whether or not you come from an English-speaking background, we included language distance as an alternative instrument. We also changed the threshold used to define the instrument. 7 years old, 11 years old. The central estimates are based on 9 years old. The results do not change by much. And finally, we tested for potential transmission mechanisms. Why people who are proficient in English are less likely to be energy poor? We had different ideas in mind. So the first one was, let's introduce individual income and employment. In the original estimates, we included income and employment. But one of the reviewers said, look, employment and income are endogenous. They depend on English proficiency. So leave them out of the regression. We left them out of the regression. If you include them, the effect of English proficiency goes down a little bit. But still, there's a large independent effect. So even controlling for individual income and employment status, you have a high effect. Then we had another hypothesis, which is social capital. The ITA dataset contains 10 variables, 10 questions that try to capture the quality of your social networks. To what extent you can rely emotionally, financially on family members, friends, and other members of the society. So we construct a social capital index, thinking that, well, perhaps people who are proficient in English have better social capital, so they can be helped by others in hard times. Social capital allows you to establish bonding relations and bridging relations with natives. So we included control for social capital, and still the effect persists. And then we included control for access to government allowances and non-income support payments. Thinking, if you are English proficient, you are more likely to have access to information regarding public opportunities, public subsidies. You are more likely to engage in relations with the administration, so probably you can get some additional help from the public sector. And we observe a small decrease in the coefficient. So perhaps part of it, but only a small part of it, can be due to better access to public assistance programs. And finally, we also control for household income, because originally we didn't include individual income. We included it here, and we also control for household income. So it seems that people who are English proficient manage to live in relatively richer households. It's not through the mapping channel, because we draw people married to native individuals. But it seems that energy poverty and language proficiency leads you to cohabiting with someone who is relatively rich by immigrant standards. So, conclusions. We started this paper thinking why income and energy expenses cannot account for the disproportionate prevalence of energy poverty among specific ethnic and immigrant groups. There is a gap between natives and immigrants in terms of energy poverty. This gap cannot be accounted for fully by income gaps, by employment gaps. So we thought, what about host language proficiency? So host language plays a role. We found that proficiency decreases the likelihood of energy poverty between 4% to 19%, depending on the indicator, and the results are robust to potential progress of omitted variable bias. Mediation analysis, well, not formally speaking, not mediation analysis, but we tested for potential channels. It seems that household income plays a role, and to a lower extent, access to public assistance programs. Labor market issues like earnings, individual income, employment, not that relevant. We didn't find support to the social capital hypothesis. It's not that you are less likely to be energy poor because you have more friends and more family ties. That's not the case. 40% of the original effect remains. Even after controlling for those factors, 40% of the effect remains. So we hypothesize, I mean, we cannot prove that, we don't have data, but we suspect that perhaps a good duration in different domains, in other words, the adoption of host country values and practices centered around household values, preferences, and energy power and energy conservation may be a potential explanation, perhaps. A limitation of the present study. We don't explore the connection between proficiency and consumers' attitudes, preferences, and behavior towards energy consumption because we don't have that information in the data set. Okay. Finally, policy recommendations. We have a number in the paper, just two. The prevailing public discourse has often centered around financial interventions. If you are energy poor, you need lower energy prices, or you need an income transfer. Well, attention. What our paper says is attention because language proficiency plays a role no matter what the income level is. So if you give two subsidies to two similar individuals, perhaps according to our results, the non-proficient immigrant has a higher chance of being energy poor. And so social transfer might have a limited effectiveness among non-proficient immigrants. This non-being proficient becomes a barrier to reduce energy poverty. And at this stage, your comments, discussions, remarks are highly welcome. Thank you very much.
So, are there any questions?
Yes, thank you very much. Do you have information about the financial situation of the individuals? Because perhaps it is not the same to have be in charge of a mortgage or debt, the debt level or approximately like this one. I don't know. You have said.
We control for housing financial stress. Thinking that perhaps you try to reduce the amount of energy bills because you have to pay a high mortgage or a high rent. So we control for housing financial stress. Yeah. One very accepted indicator is the ratio of your income that goes to pay the rent or pay the mortgage back. Yeah. We don't have more information about other financial struggles, I would say.
Children, for instance?
Yeah, we control for children. We control for children. I think, yeah, I have children, yes, no, here, and household size. Yeah.
I have a question.
Please.
In the first step of the regression, you...
Oh, the first one, sorry?
It's a profit, I guess. The first step.
It should be a profit,
Then
but it isn't.
you use as the instrumented variable the scores on the distribution of probabilities, or you transform the variable into 0 and 1s again.
It's a linear model.
So you take the probability.
Yeah. Basically, we don't care if the expected probability is above 1 or below 0. We should. It's a linear model. But we did the probability estimations and minor changes. Yeah. It's a linear model.
Seminar is closed, no? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.